So this is a game from 2 years ago. I was black in this game. This is game one of a 6 game match. Time control was 90 minutes per side with a 5 second delay. So every move we had 5 seconds before our time started ticking down. So I was white in games 2, 4, and 6, and my opponent was whites in games 1, 3, and 5. So I'm black in this game. This was a Sicilian defense, which I usually play in most of my games against e4. So white started the game with e4, and black plays c5. And white plays somewhat unusual move, knight c3. This is the closed Sicilian. And the idea is white is going to kind of give up the idea that they're going to get a big advantage in the opening and settle on a smaller advantage, a more solid position. The open Sicilian, which is played a lot more commonly, is knight f3 instead. And after black plays d6, or there's other moves that black can do, but let's just go with d6. White plays d4, take, take, and let's look at the position. So right now white is a little bit ahead on development. The bishops are open. The bishop on f1 can go to pretty much almost any square. The bishop on c1 can go to almost any square. The knight is in d4, right in the center. And black, on the other hand, has all their pieces on the back rank. The dark squared bishop is blocked, can't go anywhere. The light squared bishop's a little bit better, but notice the f5 square is controlled by the white knight and the white pawn. The g4 square is controlled by the white queen. Even the e6 square, although it's protected, is attacked by the knight on d4. So the white squared bishop can't go very far either. But black does have a bit of an advantage later in the game here. Black has two center pawns, whereas white has only one center pawn. So that could become an advantage later on in the game as more and more pieces get taken off. Black will be able, it'll be more easier for black to get a foothold in the center. But that was not the game. White played knight c3, and now black starts to try to expand in the center. And white plays f4, d5. So black is, since white didn't play d4, black is going to get the aggressive moves into the center. And take, take, and now white plays bishop b5, check. And so the black king does not want to move the king. Black does not want to move the king because that would give up castling. Also don't want to block with the queen because white's just going to take it. So really we can only really either move the bishop to block or move the knight to block. And I chose to move with the knight, mostly because I wanted to keep my light squared bishop around. But also I'm not afraid of bishop takes, b takes, because that pawn mass is going to help my center even more. So I'm not afraid of that. So white plays knight f3, continuing development. Black plays knight f6, finally starting to develop that king side. Castle, bishop e7, and now d4, which white is striking back in the center. It's a little concerning for black because if, for example, castle, take, take with check, king moves over. Not like black is losing anything here, but the d pawn is all by himself. He can't be defended by another pawn. He's defended by the queen and by the knight, but black might have to spend some time trying to defend that pawn because it can't be defended by another pawn. So I'm a little bit concerned after d4 that white is planning on taking. On the other hand, if this happens, white has no center pawns anymore, where black has one. So even though there's no win right away or anything like that. Black is feeling okay. It's a back and forth sort of thing. So after castle, white takes, black takes, and now white throws a punch at the c6 square with knight e5. And this is a good move, even if it didn't do that, because that knight is now firmly locked in the center. There's pawns protecting the knight on d4 and f4. That knight is not going anywhere anytime soon. So black has to defend, queen c7, and now white's threat plays bishop e3, which develops the last piece, the last knight or bishop, and so white has completed the development. And there's a nice good little threat as well, because if pawn is threatening to take on c5, and if the pawn takes on c5, black's not going to be able to take with the bishop, because the white will be covering the bishop on, white bishop will be covering on c5. So black takes. Now white has to take back, otherwise it's a fork, so white definitely has to take back. But which way to take back? And if the take back with the queen, this is a blunder, because c5, queen back, let's say, although the queen could have other squares available as well, and then say d4, and this is a nice fork hitting the knight on c3 and the bishop on e3. And if white says, well, at least I'll get 2 pawns for the piece, black's got a nice pin with bishop c5, and the king on g1 is taken advantage of. White is going to lose a queen for a bishop, and basically we'll just be down a whole queen just for 2 pawns. So that's 7 points. Black will have a pretty easy time. Black can just finish development and just clean up. So better is to take with the bishop, and black can still play c5, but can now retreat to f2. I don't want to retreat to e3, because that runs into that same fork that we talked about. But again, white can play a better move, bishop f2, and now there's no fork. Black plays d4, knight e2, rook d8. And it's often a good idea to set up the rook and the queen on the same file, in this case the D file, because if that pawn goes away somehow, there might be some tactics that black can take advantage of. And I thought, and actually in this game, that I would have some tactics like that when white played c3. And because I thought, okay, after d takes, the rook is hitting the queen's got to go somewhere, and then I'll take on b2. So like, let's say like if the queen goes to c2, take, and now black's up a pawn. That's nice. I mean, it's just a pawn, but it's better to be up a pawn than down a pawn, right? But white's got a better move here than queen c2. White could play b3, and this gets the queen out of danger and also hits f7. That knight in the center is helping the queen get out of trouble. So I definitely don't want the queen in my house, so I play bishop e6. White takes the pawn, and now black's the one with black has an isolated pawn on the c file, so that could become a weakness later on unless I'm able to improve my position. This does set up a nice little fork, though, because knight e4 attacks both the queen and the bishop. Obviously, white has to defend the queen or move the queen to safety. And after queen e3, knight takes f2, king takes f2. Once again, after c4, we're threatening that same pin again. If white plays h3 or something silly like that. Bishop c5 will win the queen. So the queen comes back to c3, and now I'm now that the knight on f6 is gone, I'm finally able to get rid of that knight on e5. That's been such a pain. And white's knight decides to come back to f3. And now I'm trying to take advantage of my pawn that's deep into white territory and play rook d3, which attacks the queen and helps me solidify the center. So black's definitely a little bit better now, I would say. Partly because black has the two bishops, which are generally stronger than two knights, especially on an open board like this. So there's actually not too many squares the white queen can go to, really c1 and c2. So I think c2 is probably the better one. And now bishop c5 check, and the king's got to go somewhere, right? Can't go to g1, still in check. So e1 goes back towards the center. That's gets a little bit scary. The white rooks aren't connected anymore. And so I think white does the correct decision of playing to g3, which it's stepping the king forward, possibly into an attack, but we're in a kind of a bad situation. White doesn't have a dark squared bishop to fight back with. So I double the rooks on the d file, and white's a little worried about their king. So they played h3 to hope to get back to the corner with their king so they can be safe. And now I triple on the d file, so now the d file really does belong to me. White is not going to be trying to take the d file from me, like if the rook comes over here, take, and I'm up a rook. And this will be an easy win. The A and the B pawns will fall very quickly. And even though there's no checkmate, I'll have to get a pawn to the other end and make a queen. I should win this pretty darn fast. White played king h2 here, but really all the tactics are working in black's favor because black is the attacker here. White had to be really careful. There was a move here if white played knight c1 instead to try to get rid of that rook on d3. Black has this spectacular move, queen takes f4, check. And now the only legal move is to take the queen, so the king keeps moving forward, and from there they get mated. Bishop d6 check, knight e5 to block, bishop takes check, king goes to e4, the only place they can go. And now it's mate. That's a pretty cool mate. But white did the pragmatic thing. White did the smart thing, I think. Get the king out of danger. Get the king away, because that's the most important piece. So king h2. And so black keeps trying to improve the position just a little bit. This throws a punch at the f4 square because it's attacked by both the dark squared bishop and the queen. White defends with g3, but that now weakens the knight on f3. It's no longer protected by the pawn. So black starts attacking that new weak spot. Bishop d5, rook ae1, and now queen c6. And that attacks the knight a second time. So it really, how are you going to defend the knight again? If the king comes over to protect, then you can attack it a third time with just moving the bishop away. And now it's attacked by the rook, the bishop, and the queen. It's very, I suppose you could try to defend, but it's a very uncomfortable pin. White tried something else, playing knight fg1, getting out of the way, but this gives up the light squares, and black played knight bishop h1, and that threatens queen g2 mate. And now, in order order to stop that, white's got to do something silly, like knight f3 coming back, and that just loses a rook right away. White does have a nice check here, finally taking that c-pawn with check, but black is up a rook now for just a pawn, and the white king is in really bad shape. Threatening a fork on f2, forking the king and the rook, and black still owns the d file. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. So white actually resigned after this move, so I won game one. And this is, in the beginning, I just got a good center and just kept improving slowly until the white king really had no place to go. So I hope you enjoyed this game. We'll try for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll do game two. All right.